Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here is, well, it's pretty simple. We take a huge stack of source material, we try to strip it down to its core structure, and then reveal the insights that, really make you well-informed.
And today we are taking on perhaps one of the most methodologically intense topics we've ever faced.
It's a deep, deep examination of the Quranic text, and it's one that really demands we set aside, well, everything external, historical narratives, traditions, even our own personal preferences.
Exactly. Our focus today is purely architectural. We're looking at the text not as, say, a series of stories or moral lessons, but as a system of fixed, unchanging laws.
So we're looking for the operating system, not the applications running on it.
That's the perfect analogy. We are on a mission to uncover the bedrock of constancy. We're looking for the fixed templates that govern the cosmos, divine interaction, and this is the crucial part, the very mechanism of prophetic instruction itself.
And it is absolutely essential that we state this right up front. This entire framework, this rigorous and pure Quranic methodology, the research, and all the unique linguistic discoveries we're about to get into.
All of it.
It's all based on the work established by Dr. Khaled Waleed, the owner of Almighty Covenant on YouTube, or Mithaq al-Khaliq.
And he throws down a challenge right from the start.
He does. The idea is that if you don't establish fixed, non-negotiable methodological rules that come only from within the text itself,
then any interpretive structure you build on top of that, no matter how old or how cherished it is, it's just unstable. It's built on sand.
And it will eventually collapse.
That's the cornerstone of this entire deep dive. We are treating the Quran as a book of fixed laws first and foremost. If we can prove there's constancy, that the divine law is immutable,
then a lot of other things should logically fall into place.
Right. Then we can establish fixed, reproducible templates for how prophets are educated, fixed laws for how the universe works, and even, precise, fixed definitions for what it means to be human in different moral states.
That's something the learner's always looking for, right? They want fixed rules, not just a sea of opinions.
They want the architecture.
So what's on the roadmap for today? It's pretty exhaustive. We're starting with the evidence for divine constancy itself.
The foundation.
Then we're moving into this fixed from-to pattern of prophetic travel, the min to Isla structure. After that, a really critical linguistic autopsy of creation, corruption, and human identity.
And finally, we'll look at this profound, almost terrifying threat of what's called insilak, slipping away from the very signs that define you.
It sounds like an investigation into systemic failure and systemic success, all seen through the lens of this fixed divine architecture.
That's exactly what it is. So let's get into it.
Okay, so to begin, we have to establish the absolute bedrock of this whole system. You said divine constancy isn't just a theological idea, but a cosmic operational rule. What does that actually mean for someone reading the text?
It means we have to treat the divine will and the physical mechanisms through which that will operates in the universe as absolutely unchangeable, immutable.
Okay.
I mean, think about it. If the source of the law, the divine, is unchanging, then the method, the mechanism, and the essential message of that law must also be unchanging.
Otherwise, you have a moving target.
Exactly. If God changes his rules based on time or place, then the text stops being a universal guide. It just becomes a series of, context-dependent anecdotal rulings. And this methodological approach rejects that possibility from the outset.
That's a huge shift from how many people approach religious texts. I mean, they're often looking for the exceptions, right? The abrogations, the specific rulings for one historical moment.
And this framework insists on the opposite. It insists on a rigid, universal template for everything. The law is the law.
So where does the methodology anchor this claim? It can't just be an assertion.
No, absolutely not. It's anchored on 4 fundamental, non-negotiable verses. Dr. Waleed calls them governing texts.
Governing texts, I like that.
Yeah, because they act like constitutional clauses. They dictate how all the other verses have to be interpreted. They set the boundary conditions for any and all analysis.
Okay, let's spend some real time on these 4, because I feel like the nuance here is going to be critical, especially this distinction you mentioned between different types of change.
It's everything. So the first one is maybe the most straightforward. There is no changing the words of God. That's that ote intradillary I.
Okay, so that deals with the content, the message itself, the core revelation. That's locked in.
Fixed. Absolutely. The message does not change. But then the next 2 verses get into the method or the practice, the sunnah, and they use 2 different Arabic words, tabdil and tawil.
And this is where the precision comes in. Why are both needed? What's the difference?
This is where the methodology really shines, in this linguistic precision. The text says, You will never find any change that's tabdil in the practice or law of God. And right after, in a parallel way, it says, you will never find any alteration, tawil, in the practice or law of God.
Okay, tabdil and tawil. Let's break that down. What is the subtle, but I'm guessing crucial difference between them?
So tabdil refers to changing the substance, the very essence of the law itself. Let's use an analogy. Imagine the law is gravity pulls objects toward a center of mass. Tabdil would be changing that law to say gravity now pushes objects away.
A complete reversal, a change of the core substance.
It's changing the fundamental mechanism. Now, tawil is different. Tawil means changing the locus of its application or shifting how the rule is executed. So the law might still be gravity pulls objects down, but tawil would mean that suddenly it only works on Tuesdays.
We're only in one specific city, but not another.
Exactly. It's a functional rearrangement or a substitution of the mechanism. Even if the core rule itself stays the same conceptually, the application becomes arbitrary or localized.
I see. So by prohibiting both tabdil, the change of substance, and tawil, the change of mechanism or placement,
the text establishes that the divine law is fixed in its core purpose and fixed in how and where it is applied. It has to be rigidly universal.
So, if a law of prophetic instruction worked for Abraham, it has to, in its core principles, work for Moses and for the last prophet.
The execution might look different because of the context, different times, different cultures. But the foundational sunnah, the pathway, the steps, the qualifications, they must be identical. The architecture doesn't change.
And that fourth verse, it just seems to lock the door on this whole thing.
It does. It's the final confirmation. The word shall not be changed with me. Any possibility of, temporal exceptions or personalized deviations from the rule just because someone is special.
So what of this section is massive for the listener? If the word and the law are fixed in both essence and application, then God doesn't just invent new rules for special cases.
It means that every single event described in the Quran, every story, every miracle, every command must first be viewed as a demonstration of a fixed universal law.
A repeating pattern.
Right. The methodology insists this is a book of fixed laws before it's a book of stories. Those stories are just the case studies. They are the historical documentation that shows you how that immutable law actually functions in the real world.
That reframes everything. You can't just read a story as a one-off event anymore. You have to ask, what is the underlying law being demonstrated here?
And this leads right into the idea of the divine statement as an operational system. And it's signaled by a very specific linguistic tool, the particle Catholica.
I've seen Catholica translated as likewise or thus, just a simple transition word, but you're saying it has a mandatory methodological function here.
It does. When God uses a phrase with Catholica, it's explicitly describing a sunnah, a recurring fixed law. It forces the reader, methodologically, to look for the replication of the process. It's a flashing sign that says, this is a system, not an incident.
Can you give us a concrete example of that?
Sure. Think of the verse. Thus we show Abraham the dominion of the heavens and the earth. Now, if the divine law is fixed, the use of Catholica confirms that the act of showing cosmic signs to Abraham is not some unique one-time favor.
It's not exclusive to him. It's basically saying, we showed Abraham signs in the same way we show all those who follow this path.
Exactly. The process of revelation, of guided discovery, is a fixed law. It's open to anyone who enters the system that's required for it. And this is true for all the other operational phrases. Thus we reward. Thus we revealed. The particle Catholica is the signpost. It confirms that the action rewarding, showing, revealing is part of a recurring, fixed model.
So our job as readers is to see that word thus and immediately ask, okay, what's the model? What's the repeatable process here?
That is the methodological duty. You find the common denominator and the fixed rule that governs the act of showing or rewarding.
Let me challenge this for a second, though. Does this rigidity, this insistence on fixed operational systems, does it take away the element of divine personal intervention, what we might call miracles?
Not at all. It just redefines what a miracle is. In this methodology, a miracle is not an exception to a rule. It's the application of a higher, more complex rule that we just don't fully understand yet. But that rule is still constant.
So when the sea splits for Moses, it's not tawil, it's not God altering the laws of physics for a moment.
Exactly. It is the application of a fixed physical law, perhaps related to the interaction of divine command and matter, that is perfectly repeatable under the exact same conditions. The mechanism is constant, even if the circumstances that trigger it are unique and known only to the divine.
That's a powerful way to look at it. It grounds every event in a constant, universal, and reproducible rule. And if that's the case, if the operational rule is fixed, then the path taken by the prophets must also be fixed. Which brings us perfectly to this idea of a fixed template for prophetic instruction. And it's often mapped out, you say, using this from-to structure, the min to ila. Now, this sounds like simple geography, but the methodology treats it as a strict rule for spiritual travel.
Yes, the source material is adamant on this point. The min to ila structure is not poetry. It is not a metaphor. It's a non-metaphorical descriptor of a real, controlled transition.
Whether that's a physical move, a cognitive shift, or both.
Both. And it demands three absolute fixed elements are present. A fixed starting point, the min, a fixed endpoint, the ila, and a clear divine purpose for the journey, education, mission launch, something specific.
So if I say I went from my parents' house to my first apartment, that's a real transition. There's a start, an end, and a purpose independence. It's not just a feeling.
That's it. And the core principle here is that the min to ila structure in the Quran is never just metaphorical without a real-world effect. A transition is always the establishment of a methodology. It's a documented process.
And this template, this fixed law of spiritual travel, connects directly to one of the most famous and frankly debated events in the text, Al-Isra, the night journey.
Yes, the verse describes that very transition.
Moving the servant from the sacred mosque to the farthest mosque.
So, if we apply the principle of divine constancy we just established,
then this night journey cannot be an isolated one-off incident for one person. It just can't be. If God's laws are constant, this journey must reveal a fixed educational path. A sunnah in the method of prophetic instruction. It establishes the necessary pathway for the prophetic function to be activated. So you're saying the night journey isn't just a miracle for that prophet. It's the public documentation of a recurring educational model. It's the curriculum outline, not just the graduation ceremony.
it is the fixed law made visible through one historical example, and the logical necessity follows immediately. If the law is constant, then the starting point, the destination, and the purpose, which the verse says is to show him our signs and educate him, must also be constant principles in the methodology of prophecy.
So the only things that change are what the specific person and the specific time.
Right. The variables are when, to whom, and how many times. But those details don't negate the fixed rule. The process of moving from point A, which is, say, established religion or early devotion, to point B, a dedicated place of higher learning and signs, that remains fixed.
Okay, this gives us a lens. We can use this template to look at other prophets and see if their stories follow the same educational journey.
And they do.
Let's start with case study number 1, Abraham, the educational migration. This seems to fit the Min to Isla template perfectly.
It does. Abraham's narrative is a perfect illustration of this methodologically driven path. We start with his starting point, Al-Mashriq, the east.
Right, which we traditionally see as Mesopotamia, but the methodology gives it a functional definition, not just a geographical one. It's related to the word shirk, or polytheism.
Exactly. Functionally, Al-Mashriq is defined as the environment where corruption, skepticism, and human-made legislative systems shirk, originate, and fester. It is the cognitive starting condition. It's a world saturated with false authority.
And Abraham's process didn't begin with a sudden, out-of-the-blue revelation.
Not at all. It began with intense intellectual inquiry. He's searching, looking at the planets, the moon, the sun, watching them rise and set, and then concluding, logically, I do not love those that set. He's using reason to deconstruct the false gods around him.
So that intellectual detachment, that's the necessary first step before the physical move.
It is the absolute prerequisite. The intellectual disassociation called Ayat from his people's entire corrupted system, both cognitive and physical, is the necessary step taken in that starting environment of Al-Mashriq. So the min, the from, is the corrupt system he has to depart from.
Okay, we have the fixed starting point, the corrupted system. Now, what about the transition and the destination?
The transition follows the exact structure. We rescued him and Lot to the land we blessed for all creation. This wasn't him looking for better grazing land or trying to escape a famine.
It wasn't an economic migration.
It was a purposeful, divinely guided shift to what we can only call the divine school.
The destination. Al-Ard al-Mubaraka, the blessed land. If baraka, or blessing, is a functional term, what is the function of this land in the curriculum?
In this context, baraka is defined functionally. It is the designated place of revelation, of teaching, of establishment. It's the mission launch site for prophecy. It's where the prophet receives the signs and is stabilized before his message is broadcast to the world. You could call it the control center for divine communication.
The sequence really does confirm the educational model, doesn't it?
Look at the steps. Intellectual inquiry and disassociation, that's the min. Then a localized, purposeful transition, that's the journey. Then arrival in the blessed land, the place of Baraka, the school. Then establishment of the covenant. Then prophecy. Then scripture.
It's the full Sunnah model in action.
He searched, he chose detachment, and that choice led him through the fixed educational transition to the designated site of learning and mission launch. It's a perfect confirmation of the Min to Isla template.
Okay, but what about the prophets who weren't searching? You know, the ones who didn't intellectually choose this path of detachment. You mentioned Moses was forced or attracted. How does the model account for that?
This is a critical point because it shows the law is fixed, but the method of enrollment can vary. Moses didn't set out on a journey of intellectual searching like Abraham. He was just working, moving his family, and he was attracted, Jutaba, while on a totally ordinary worldly path.
He saw the fire.
He saw the fire, he was drawn to it, he arrived at the location, and only after he arrived did the divine call come.
So the Min to Isla transition still happened, but the motivation for leaving the starting point, the Min, was an external pull, not an internal choice.
Exactly, and the moment of arrival is key. The text says, when he came to it, a voice called, "O Moses, I am your Lord. So take off your sandals, you are in the sacred valley of Tua."
Take off your sandals, a sign of respect, of setting aside the worldly.
And of dedication, because the destination was the sacred valley of Tua. Al-Wadi Ambuquadas Tua.
So how does Tua function as the divine school in the same way the Blessed Land did for Abraham?
It serves the exact same functional purpose. It's a designated site of learning, preparation, seclusion, and spiritual isolation. Notice the description. It's a wadi, a low, secluded valley. It's mquadas, sanctified, set apart for a specific divine purpose. And it's given a proper name, Tua. This isn't just a random spot in the desert, it's the training ground.
And the curriculum, unlike Abraham's self-guided search, is imposed on him immediately when he gets there.
Yes, the order of operations is a perfect blueprint. First, attraction, the fire, the initial pull, then sanctification of the place. This is Tua. Then divine definition, I am your Lord. Then a command to listen. Fastami, which means listen closely. Pay attention to what is about to be revealed.
So class is in session.
Class is in session. Then comes intensive theological instruction, monotheism, prayer, signs, and only then, after all of that, does he receive the prophetic commission. Go to Pharaoh.
The text seems to stress this functional identity change that happens at the school. Before Tua, Moses was a righteous man, a servant. During Tua, he's a student. After Tua, he's a prophet and a messenger.
That is the fixed law of prophetic selection. No prophet is ever commissioned for public outreach before completing these phases. They have to be stabilized through the signs first. The constant tension in these stories is between the need for the worldly mission and the necessity of this detachment and isolation for the initial instruction.
So whether it's Abraham's self-willed migration or Moses' forced attraction.
They both lead to the same functional destination, the prophetic school, established by the Sunnah.
This methodology is building a really rigid case. If the path is fixed, then the very definitions of humanity, creation, and corruption must also be fixed and linguistically precise.
They have to be.
So let's turn the microscope on the language itself. Okay, so we're moving from the physical journey to the linguistic core. And we need to get into this distinction between making and creating, the difference between ja'ala and kalaka. Now, this might sound like academic hair-splitting, but it seems to have radical implications for understanding the very beginning of humanity.
It's absolutely vital. The whole methodology rests on this kind of linguistic precision. Kalaka means creation from nothing, ex nihilo. It's a singular, unique act of bringing something into existence where nothing was before.
Okay, creation from scratch.
Right, but ja'ala, to make, to cause to be, to place, that signifies a transformation. It's a change in the function or the status of something that already exists.
Can you give us a tangible analogy? If I build a house from a pile of lumber and nails, that's kalaka.
You've created something new.
But if I take that finished house and I remodel it, I change its function from a home into a doctor's office. That's ja'ala, is that right?
That's a perfect working analogy. The house already existed. You are changing its purpose, its state, its function relative to its environment. And every single instance in the Quran, ja'ala requires a prior existence that is then given a new role. You cannot jala something that wasn't already there.
Wow. Okay, so the implication for that foundational statement about human existence, the idea of succession or khilafah.
That's profound.
When God says, I am making a successor, Khalifa, on earth. Pu aicis, hisu e pelio.
If that linguistic rule holds, that statement cannot mean I am creating a brand new species out of thin air. That would have required the word kalaka. Since jalala is used, it must mean transforming a pre-existing state into a new, higher functional state.
So, selecting a creature that's already on Earth and elevating its role to that of Khalifa, a steward or successor.
Which logically requires that there was a prior, intelligent, sentient, earthly genus from which this succession is being made.
That completely reframes how most people read the story of human origins. It argues for intelligent life forms on Earth before Adam.
It does. And this interpretation is then strongly supported by the angel's query, which is traditionally a big point of contention. But the methodology uses these fixed rules to resolve it.
Let's tackle that head on. The angels ask, will you place therein one who will cause corruption and shed blood? Why must that be based on prior experience? Couldn't it just be, as tradition often suggests, that they had some foresight, that they knew humanity's potential for corruption?
That interpretation, angelic foresight, violates the fixed divine rules we just established in Part 1.
How so?
Because angels do not possess knowledge of the future, of the unseen al-ghaib. God explicitly rebukes them for this later by saying, I know what you do not know. If the angels already knew the future with certainty, God's response would be completely redundant.
That's the pivot. So the methodology argues that since they don't know the future, their very specific question, not just about corruption but about shedding blood, must be empirical.
It has to be based on prior experience or observation. They had already witnessed a previous intelligent, sentient, earthly genus that was prone to bloodshed and corruption. They saw a pattern. Their question isn't a prophecy. It's a justifiable historical observation based on the past conduct of Earth's inhabitants.
So the linguistic requirement of Ja'ala and the limited knowledge of the angels, when you put them together.
They both point strongly to the existence of an intelligent predecessor genus.
Okay, that makes the case for fixed laws applying even to the planet itself. Now let's get into the deepest linguistic distinction concerning the individual. Man versus human. Insan versus bashar. If the goal is fixed law, these cannot just be interchangeable synonyms.
They cannot. And mixing them up, according to this research, is the source of profound moral and theological confusion. Let's establish al-bashar first. This is a neutral descriptive term. It's tied purely to the physical body, biological needs, the potential for spiritual refinement. It is the functional physical entity.
The hardware, the potential, the physical vessel.
Precisely. And it's associated with being physically shaped or leveled and having the divine spirit breathed into it. Now look at the consistency in how the prophets speak. Every single prophet said, I am only a bashar like you.
Acknowledging their shared physical, biological nature.
Yes. They are emphasizing, my hardware is the same as yours. They never, ever claim to be an insan.
Okay, so if bashar is the neutral potential, the physical human, then al-insan must represent a behavioral or moral state, specifically a state of functional failure.
That's it, exactly. Al-insan is a qualitative behavioral description, and it is almost exclusively associated with functional failure, arrogance, or severe condemnation. The language used with it is brutal.
Like what?
The insan is described as zalum, tyrannical, kanud, ungrateful, jadali, argumentative, halua, heedless and panicked. And in one of the most severe verses, outright condemned, the insan is slain, how ungrateful he is.
So insan represents the moral state of deviance that a bashar falls into after receiving knowledge and guidance.
It's the software crashing after a corrupting update. It's the state you enter after being given a choice and the instruction, and you choose arrogance. The bashar is the vessel. The insan is the moral identity after it defaults to failure.
And this distinction can clarify some really challenging passages, like the chapter Abasa, he frowned and turned away. The methodology would prohibit attributing the condemnation meant for the insan state to the bashar status of a prophet.
Right. So in Abasa, the initial behavioral critique is directed at the physical person, the bashar, who frowned. But the subsequent definitive condemnation, which is incredibly severe, the insan is slain, how ungrateful he is. That is directed toward the insan pattern of arrogance, the functional failure inherent in rejecting guidance because of social status.
So the condemnation is not of the prophet's office, the bashar, but of the behavioral pattern, the insan, that he briefly exhibited.
It's a condemnation of the arrogance of the learned. It shows that even the highest potential, the bashar, can momentarily slip into the lowest state, the insan. This separation of functional identity from physical identity is crucial. It maintains the prophet's unique status as a locus of revelation while still allowing for human fallibility in behavior.
It maintains the fixed law. The law is that arrogance and rejection of guidance leads to the condemned insan's status, regardless of the physical vessel, the bashar, that's carrying it. This focus on the potential for functional failure brings us to what might be the most severe concept in this whole framework. Insilak, slipping away from science. This isn't just sinning or making a mistake. You defined it as an existential extraction.
Yes, insilak is exponentially more severe than a common sin or forgetfulness or even casual abandonment. Linguistically, the root means a forceful existential extraction from something that was fused to your very being.
Like skin separating from the body.
Exactly. Or a snake shedding its skin. That's the image. It sheared it in. He was stripped from them.
So, to use an analogy to make this clear, if a normal sin is like getting a parking ticket, what is insilak?
Insilak is having your citizenship completely revoked, your identity erased, your passport burned, because you betrayed the core covenant upon which that identity rested. It's an irreversible functional failure that implies the person had reached a status where the divine signs, the Ayat, were fused to their very identity.
So this act, this extraction, can only be performed by someone whose status was profoundly defined by those divine signs in the first place. You can't be stripped of something you never had.
Precisely. And this leads us directly to the unnamed case study in chapter Al-Araf, verse 175. Relate to them the story of the one whom we gave our signs, but he slipped away from them. The identity is hidden, but the function is exposed for all to see.
That phrase, we gave our signs, atina we atina, that sounds incredibly specific.
It's the language of selective divine endowment. This exact phrase is used only for individuals granted unique knowledge, the ability to govern, or prophecy. It was the status given to figures like Moses and David. It absolutely denotes prophetic or near-prophetic status. This was a person who was formally enrolled in the divine school we talked about.
And the text confirms the extraordinary potential that was just thrown away.
It says it clearly. Had we willed, we would have elevated him through them the signs. That's ejo. The word for elevation, Rafa, confirms he was qualified for the highest selective status. He had the knowledge, he had the signs, he had the functional capacity to be elevated even further, but he failed the condition.
This transforms the story from just an anecdote about some greedy man to a universal warning about the conditionality of divine selection. So, what was the mechanism of the fall? What was the act of insilak?
The text states he inclined toward the earth. Aklada ila alard. This is the functional pivot. It means choosing worldly power, temporal authority, self-legislation, or the immediate gratification of the earth over the fixed, unchanging law of the divine signs.
He used the knowledge he was given for worldly gain, not for divine purpose.
He chose to become his own source of law. He legislated for himself. And the consequence is just devastating. The text says he was then pursued by Satan and fell to the level of a dog.
That is the lowest possible comparison.
And it's used here for someone who fell from the highest height of knowledge. This comparison is never made for common polytheists or disbelievers. It's reserved for the one who had the signs and then rejected their authority.
The methodology insists the name is deliberately kept anonymous. Why? Why keep him unnamed if his status was so high?
Because the Quran wants the focus to remain entirely on the pattern, on the possibility of functional failure, even for those granted the highest signs. The story serves as a constant methodological warning. Prophecy is a covenant, and it's conditioned on constancy. It is not an eternal, absolute guarantee against functional fallibility, against insilak.
The moment you choose your own law.
The moment you incline to the earth, the status is revoked.
Which means that the measure is always the bayan, the clarity, the criterion of the law, not the historical prestige of the name on the door.
That's the ultimate goal of the methodology, to show that the fixed law is the only measure, and that the greatest danger is internal functional failure, even after you've received the highest grace.
Okay, so now we have to draw this crucial link between the individual functional failure, insilak, and the collective systemic deviation that can plague entire communities that receive scripture. And this starts with identifying the most dangerous form of deviation, which the methodology calls unauthorized prohibition, or tarim.
This is critical, and it gets into the political dimension of the methodology. Tarim is the act of arrogating God's exclusive right to legislate what is lawful, halal, and what is prohibited, haram. And this act is the functional equivalent of shirk, of polytheism.
That's a huge claim. This goes way beyond just bowing to idols. You're arguing that simply obeying human legislation over divine law constitutes functional polytheism.
Absolutely. You can claim with your tongue to worship only God, but if you functionally obey human authorities who legislate in areas reserved only for the divine,
like prohibiting foods God made lawful or legalizing things God made unlawful,
then you have, in practice, created a partner, a shirik, with God in his exclusive legislative domain. That is functional shirk. It's not about what you say, it's about whose law you actually follow.
And the methodology uses the specific case of Israel to illustrate the historical origin of this systemic failure.
Yes, and we have to look purely at the text here, setting aside other traditions. The verse says, "All food was lawful to the children of Israel, except what Israel made unlawful for himself."
Okay, what are the key methodological facts we can derive just from that verse alone?
First, this prohibition was explicitly established before the Torah was revealed. That's a critical chronological marker. It was a pre-scriptural legislation. Second, it was implemented by Israel upon himself, meaning a singular person initiated a self-made law. It wasn't a divine command.
And third, the Quran presents Israel as this distinct agent who imposed a religious system that was then followed by his descendants, Bani Israel.
Right, and the methodology insists on separating this figure, Israel, from Jacob or Yaqub, because the text itself doesn't explicitly make that connection. It preserves Israel as the singular origin point of a self-legislated system that was then inherited.
So this shows a pre-existing religious system that was subject to human legislative authority, which violates the very principle of constancy we started with. It's the individual fallibility of the Insilak case, but on a foundational collective level.
And the text makes the connection immediate. The story of the unnamed Insilak, the individual fall, is immediately followed by the declaration. That is the example of the people who denied our signs.
So the individual failure sets the template for the collective inheritance of that failure. And the term used is denial of signs, takdhib bil-ayat.
Yes, and takdhib bil-ayat is a specific legal accusation. It is reserved for those who were given the signs, who had the scripture, who had the covenant, and who then consciously corrupted or rejected them after receiving that knowledge.
It's not general ignorance or kufr. It's a crime of the knowledgeable.
Precisely. And this pattern breaking covenants, distorting words, and institutionalizing tarim, or self-legislation, is consistently linked to the collective group described as Bani Israel.
So the methodology distinguishes between the general state of those who reject a message through ignorance and the specific functional crime of those who reject the signs through corruption and self-legislation.
Exactly. And this leads to the ultimate methodological pivot, the distinction between Bani Israel and Bani Adam. These have to be read as two distinct methodological categories, not just generalized human labels.
How does the text lay out their different functional roles?
Bani Adam, the sons of Adam, they represent the general human covenant. Their narrative is associated with universal obligations, general warnings about Satan, the need for piety. They're defined by the possibility of guidance and the need for covering, both physical and spiritual. It's the general human condition.
And Bani Israel.
Bani Israel, the sons of Israel, are the specialized educational and historical case study. They are associated with specific grace, a specific covenant, and the catastrophic historical consequences of breaking that covenant. Their stories about the distortion of method, the implementation of tarim, and the denial of signs, takdhib. They represent a community that received the highest form of teaching and then systematically deviated from the fixed laws through functional polytheism.
So the methodology uses these groups to show how a collective deviation starts with an individual failure to stick to the fixed law,
Usually through the act of self-legislation.
which is then inherited by the collective. And that collective is then judged by the same fixed law that rewards or condemns based on constancy to the rule.
The Quran offers the model of insilak, the functional failure of the elite individual, and then shows the consequence. The development of a systematic, inherited failure to recognize and follow the fixed divine signs. A failure institutionalized by the group that follows the founder of that prohibited system. The pattern is fixed, constant, and repeatable.
This has been an incredibly rigorous, really detailed journey, viewing the Quran purely as a system of fixed, constant laws. And it's a methodological approach, we have to say again, derived entirely from the framework of Dr. Khaled Waleed and Almighty Covenant. Let's try to synthesize the core findings we've unpacked today.
I think it boils down to four main pillars of this methodological approach. First, the absolute unchanging nature of divine law, the Sunnah. It prohibits both tabdil, changing the essence, and ta'wil, changing the mechanism. That constancy is the foundation for any sound interpretation.
Second, we saw the existence of a fixed, non-metaphorical educational movement, the Isra, or the Min to Isla journey, which is required for prophetic instruction. We saw it with Abraham's choice and with the pull on Moses, a mandatory journey from corruption to a sacred place of learning.
Third, that critical linguistic precision. Distinguishing insan, the flawed, condemned moral state, from bashar, the neutral physical potential for prophecy. And that distinction prevents us from misattributing the condemnation of arrogance to the prophetic office itself.
And fourth, and this one is profound, the reality that receiving divine signs is a conditional covenant. The possibility of insilak, that complete existential sinking away from the signs to choose worldly power, it exists even for those who are qualified for the highest elevation.
And the crux of this entire methodological endeavor, really, is to prevent two major pitfalls that corrupt how people read the text. The first is denying the absolute constancy of God's laws. The second is elevating the names or the individuals, prophets, righteous people, to the status of infallible deities or unconditional guarantees.
Which is, in effect, a form of what you called cognitive shirk.
Yes, associating partners with God in his exclusive legislative authority.
So the measure, as we concluded, is always the baywan, the clarity, the criterion of the fixed law itself, not the personality or the prestige of the name.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider. If the covenant is conditional, and if the possibility of functional failure is always present, then the Quran is demanding constant vigilance from its reader. The greatest danger is not simple ignorance. It's the refusal to distinguish between al-mu'minun, those who are established in belief and constancy, and al-lasina amanu, those who have believed but still require constant legislative caution and warning because they haven't yet passed the test of constancy.
So a gap between claiming belief and proving it through action.
It's the ongoing tension between human potential and functional failure. The work of constancy, of adhering to the fixed law, is never finished.
A truly challenging and detailed analysis. It really views the text as an operational manual, not just a history book. We hope this exploration into the fixed laws of prophetic instruction provides you with a completely new lens, a new way to understand the profound consistency in the divine system. Until next time, keep digging deeper into the sources.